Peter Finkel's mind worked like a Swiss watch, precise, relentless, and engineered for performance. From the moment he walked into Fairgrove Asset Management at 25, he made an impression, not by schmoozing in boardrooms or boasting about weekend escapades in the Hamptons like many of his colleagues, but by delivering results. Cold, hard, undeniable results. In 5 short years, Peter quietly became the firm's secret weapon. He wasn't the loudest in meetings, but his market instincts were razor sharp. He could smell a trend before it took root. While others chased headlines, Peter studied footnotes in earnings reports, finding overlooked gems and undervalued positions. Clients who were lucky enough to have him managing their portfolios saw returns above benchmark nearly every quarter. But did he receive recognition? That never came. Promotions were handed to those with connections. Raises were whispered behind closed doors. The praise always seemed to stop just short of his office door. He worked late nights while others networked. He absorbed blame and gave away credit. Slowly, resentment built inside him like pressure in a sealed chamber. Eventually, he asked himself the question that would change his life. Why am I doing all this for someone else? The answer came with a resignation letter and a leap into the unknown. Peter launched his own accounting and advisory firm out of a modest office space with one window, a used laptop, and a cheap coffee machine that always tasted like burnt toast. He called it Finkle Accounting and Tax Advisory. Plain, professional, no frills, just like him. His early clients were a mix of small business owners, freelancers, and retirees who found him through local ads or word of mouth. Peter handled their taxes, cleaned up their books, and occasionally advised on investment planning. He wore every hat: accountant, marketer, admin, even janitor. He worked harder than ever before, but now the stakes were personal. Every client he lost felt like a personal failure. Every dollar of overhead was a weight on his shoulders. Though his client list slowly grew, the firm never seemed to hit profitability. For every 2 steps forward, he took 1, and sometimes 2, back. He tried seminars, email campaigns, partnerships with local financial planners, even door-to-door pitches. But rent was rising, the bills kept coming, and Peter was running out of patience and money. Then came the idea, an opportunity, unconventional, profitable, unethical. He wrestled with it for a few nights, pacing his apartment, staring out the window, telling himself he was just being efficient, not dishonest. Eventually, the pressure of survival silenced his conscience. He took the leap again, this time into the shadows. The model was deceptively simple. Take in new investment capital under the guise of exclusive, high-yield tax-deferred instruments, and use that capital to pay off earlier clients who were promised quarterly liquidity. Nobody asked too many questions because the returns were just high enough to be enticing, but not so outrageous as to draw attention. At first, Peter told himself it was temporary, just until the firm got back on its feet. But once the money started flowing, the temptation to keep going became irresistible. His income exploded. From netting a few thousand a month, he was now making 6 figures per client cycle. His office moved to a high-rise downtown. He hired 2 associates, an office manager, and a receptionist with perfect posture and a dazzling smile. More importantly, his reputation changed. Clients began referring him with reverence. Peter's a genius. He gets results. The tax whisperer. The firm grew fast. He opened a second office in Miami. A third in Scottsdale followed. The money poured in like rain in monsoon season. And with the money came everything else. Miami brought out a different Peter, one who wore Italian linen and drove a convertible Aston Martin, one who ate at places where the valet knew his name, one who had finally become the man he always thought he should be. At a charity art auction on a moonlit rooftop, Peter met her, Selena Valen, a gallery curator with eyes like fire and a voice like silk. She moved like she owned the air around her, elegant, effortless, enigmatic. They talked for hours about art, about ambition, about the illusion of security. She liked his intellect, his confidence, the way he didn't brag but let his aura do the work. He liked how she challenged him, how she didn't flinch at luxury, how she made him feel like he was already somebody. Within 6 months, they were married in an exclusive vineyard in Napa. The photos were featured in a lifestyle magazine. The yacht parties doubled, the champagne flowed. But beneath it all, the machine had started grinding louder. The firm's expenses now included multi-million-dollar mortgages, luxury vehicles, and a lifestyle that required constant influx of capital. And that capital had to come from somewhere. Eric Schaap was no billionaire, just a cautious man with a careful plan. He'd met Peter in the firm's earlier days and invested conservatively, about $300,000, after a long conversation about structured tax shelters and quarterly liquidity. Peter had impressed him. Confident, intelligent, honest, or so it seemed. But now it was the third quarter. His money was supposed to be available in the second. Peter hadn't returned his last 3 emails. So Eric showed up. The Miami office still impressed. Glass walls, modern art, a receptionist who offered him espresso. Peter emerged from his office with a smile too smooth to be sincere. "Eric, what a surprise. Come in." Eric's voice was steady but firm. "It's been 3 months. I need to know what's going on with my account." Peter leaned back in his chair, putting on his best performance. "Minor custodial delay," he said. "Some back office hiccup. You'll have access next week. I'm already pushing it through." Eric didn't argue, but he didn't believe him either. When he left, Peter sat alone in his glass office for a long time, staring at the city. He wasn't worried about Eric specifically. He was worried about what Eric represented. Because Peter knew the truth. There was no account, no custodial delay. The money had been used to pay off someone else, and someone else's would pay off the next. The pyramid was teetering, and the knock at the door was just the beginning. It began with whispers, small inconsistencies flagged by junior analysts at a rival firm. One noticed the irregularities in Peter's reported asset growth. Another caught the inflated values in subsidiary holdings. These whispers found their way into a compliance officer's inbox at the SEC. At first, it was just a request for documentation, a harmless audit, the kind firms like Peter's received every few years. Peter welcomed the inquiry with faux calm, but behind closed doors, his staff worked around the clock fabricating paperwork, cleaning spreadsheets, and deleting email threads. He knew this was more than routine. One afternoon, his lead associate, Lauren, cornered him. "Peter, this isn't normal," she whispered, voice trembling. "The numbers don't add up anymore. Even the backups have gaps." Peter looked her in the eye, something cold and commanding in his gaze. "Then make them add up." Lauren never questioned him again, but she started keeping copies of everything, just in case. Meanwhile, Eric Schaap had begun making noise. After weeks of silence and evasion, he filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Financial Regulation. The agency flagged it, and within days, Peter's name was added to an internal watch list. Peter could feel the walls closing in, but he wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Selena was the first to notice the change. Peter became distracted, volatile. He stopped attending gallery openings. He skipped dinner dates. At night, he stood on the penthouse balcony for hours, staring into the distance like he was calculating the weight of the world. She'd always known he had secrets, but secrets were part of success. One night, she found a sealed envelope in Peter's desk, addressed to a Richard Holloway, a name she didn't recognize. Inside was a cashier's check for $850,000 and a handwritten note, "Disburse in stages. Don't contact me." Selena didn't ask. She simply began to plan. Peter came home the next week to find her packing for a spa retreat. She kissed him goodbye, but there was distance in her eyes. Once gone, she transferred large sums from their joint account to her personal trust, then contacted her lawyer to initiate asset protection measures. Peter didn't realize it until the third declined credit card. That same day, the SEC formally opened an investigation into Finkle accounting and tax advisory. The news broke on a Thursday. "Miami money manager under federal investigation for fraud," read the first headline. It spread fast. Financial blogs, morning talk shows, Reddit forums. Clients panicked. Phones rang off the hook. Investors rushed to withdraw funds that didn't exist. Peter tried to contain it, calling it a misunderstanding, blaming rogue employees and third-party vendors. But the story was out of his hands. Lauren, the associate who once feared him, had turned whistleblower. Armed with backup files, internal memos, and falsified audit reports, she sat with investigators for over 9 hours. That night, federal agents raided the Miami office. They took everything: hard drives, paper records, backup servers. Employees were sent home. The firm's website went offline. Peter sat alone in his office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and shattered illusions. For the first time in years, he didn't have a plan. Selena returned, just not to him. She was photographed stepping off a yacht in Ibiza, hand in hand with a venture capitalist from Sao Paulo. The tabloids speculated. The timing was too perfect. Insiders claimed she'd been working with her lawyer for months, slowly siphoning assets and distancing herself from Peter's crumbling empire. Peter tried calling. The number was disconnected. Then came the final dagger. A subpoena arrived with her name on it, Selena Valen Finkle, listed as a cooperating witness. She'd turned over bank records, personal correspondences, and signed affidavits. Peter stared at her signature on the documents, his heart hollow. He had fought for recognition, for independence, for power, and now he had none of it. He was alone, broke, cornered, and indicted. The courtroom was cold, sterile. Peter sat at the defense table in a cheap gray suit, a far cry from the tailored navy ones he once wore. The charges were read: wire fraud, securities fraud, falsifying financial records, obstruction of justice. He pled not guilty. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence: testimony from clients, former employees, forensic accountants. Lauren's statement hit hardest. "I believed in him," she said, voice trembling, "until I realized he believed in nothing but himself." Peter didn't flinch, but inside he felt every word like a blade. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Inside, his world shrank. His legal team negotiated, trying for a deal. He refused to cooperate. His pride still clung to the idea that he could outsmart them. But the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the ledger. Peter Finkel was convicted on 8 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice. The verdict came swiftly after a 6-week trial filled with damning evidence and broken relationships. In the end, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours. The judge delivered the sentence with calm finality. 22 years in federal prison. There was no gasp in the courtroom, no sobs, just the rhythmic tapping of keys from reporters and the hushed whispers of justice fulfilled. Peter stood motionless. No protests, no tears, just a numb acceptance that the game was finally over. The last image he had of freedom was the sound of the cell door slamming shut at USP Allenwood, a high-security prison in Pennsylvania. His empire was gone. His name was mud. But his mind? That was still sharp. Prison was a different world. Rules weren't written. They were learned, quickly. Peter kept to himself at first. He avoided eye contact, declined offers for favors, and counted the hours. But word eventually spread about the finance guy from Miami. One afternoon in the prison library, he was approached by a tall man with tattoos that snaked down his arms like vines. "Yo, you Peter Finkel?" Peter looked up slowly. "Depends who's asking." The man smiled. "They call me Dre. Heard you know money." Andre Dre Montes wasn't just another inmate. He was a major player on the outside, a drug kingpin with a still-functioning empire. He had lieutenants, investments, and problems, and he needed someone who could clean, launder, and protect his assets while he served his sentence. In Peter, he saw an opportunity. "I'll keep you safe," Dre said. "You help me keep my books safe." Peter agreed, not because he wanted protection, but because he needed purpose. They worked at night under the flicker of fluorescent lights using pencil and paper, memory and code. Peter taught Dre the basics of offshore trusts, layered LLCs, and cryptocurrency flow. Dre offered protection, access, and information. In return, Peter built a small empire from the inside, legitimate on the surface, but layered in complexity. Word spread. Inmates began coming to him with requests, help calculating child support, managing restitution payments, even building post-prison business plans. He became known as the Professor. He hosted unofficial classes in the chapel twice a week. Former gang members, embezzlers, Even guards sat in the back to listen. For the first time, Peter felt useful, not admired, not feared, but respected. But prison doesn't stay calm for long. One evening, Peter was ambushed in the showers. Two inmates cornered him, knives fashioned from toothbrush handles. They weren't from Dre's crew. "Snitch!" one spat. Peter didn't fight. He froze. They lunged. And then they were gone, tackled by two of Dre's men who dragged Peter to safety. Later, Peter learned that one of the inmates had a brother who lost everything in Peter's old fund. Vengeance had a long reach. That night, Dre came to see him. "You're not invincible," Dre warned, "but you are valuable. Start thinking like it." Peter didn't sleep for 3 nights, but he came out of it changed. Less fearful, more focused. He tightened security, refused certain jobs, became more selective. He also began writing his story, his regrets, his knowledge. A ledger of truth to balance the ledger of lies. 7 years passed. Peter's good behavior, combined with cooperation during a large-scale prison tax fraud bust, discovered thanks to his teachings, earned him a reduction in sentence. He was released on parole after 9 years. He stepped out into a quiet world. No fanfare, no cameras. Just the smell of cold air and a long walk to a halfway house in Baltimore. He got a job at a local nonprofit helping ex-convicts build financial literacy. He rode the bus, wore thrift store clothes, lived in a small room with a leaky ceiling. But he was honest. He spoke at conferences, testified in financial reform hearings. He started a podcast anonymously at first about financial ethics. It gained traction. His past haunted him, but it also fueled him. He never heard from Selena again, never wanted to. But sometimes he'd look out his apartment window at night, remembering the view from his penthouse in Miami, and he'd whisper a quiet truth to himself. "I built an empire from lies, but now I'm building something that might finally be real." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more just like it.